Welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight we have special guest, intelligence community remote viewer Angela Ford. But before I introduce her, check out Raised by Giants on Rokfin. It is a completely uncensored platform. Go over there, set up a free account, get all of my regular content that I post here on YouTube and all the other creators' content as well. And sign up for Rockfin's premium content, which is far less than a YouTube premium account. And you'll get my premium uncensored content when it gets released and all of the other creators' premium content as well. Check the link in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform, Rockfin. Also, check out C60 Purple Power. It is the most powerful antioxidant on the planet. Helps with energy levels, skin problems, infections, eyesight, brain cognition, EMF, radiation, and a lot more. It's a free radical sponge that gives your body the ability to heal itself. And if you use promo code GIANTS10 from the link in the description, you'll get 10% off your entire purchase. So without further ado, tonight's guest is Angela Ford. Angela Ford was born and raised in Western Pennsylvania. For over 32 years, she worked for the intelligence community in Washington, D.C. The Defense Intelligence Agency hired Angela in 1986 to participate in StarGate's Psychic Phenomenon program. She worked as a remote viewer for 9 years. Angela retired from federal service in 2010 and is best known for her successes in the remote viewing area. Angela was given special acknowledgement in the former Secretary of Defense William Cohen's book, Murder in the Senate. She has also written about in Annie Jacobson's book, The Phenomenon, The Secret History of the U.S. Government's Investigations into Extrasensory Perception and Telekinesis. A Newsweek article dated November 15th, 2015 mentions Angela and her work in the paranormal field, and she appeared on CBS Sunday Morning on March 18th and August 19th, 2019. In December of 2015, Angela was invited to Moscow by a Russian newspaper to attend the reception in honor of 2 books written about the U.S. and Soviet psychic programs. During her stay, she appeared on 2 Russian television programs. Currently, Angela works with Dr. Ed May at the Laboratories of Fundamental Research, LFR, in Mountain View, California. In addition to exploring psi phenomenon, LFR is a center for interdisciplinary research devoted to understanding a wide range of human experiences. Angela also teaches at the Monroe Institute in Virginia, a leading education center for studying human consciousness. Hello and welcome to the show, Angela. It's wonderful to have you. Thanks so much for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Yes, how I found you was kind of interesting. I was actually watching this documentary on MK Ultra in Canada, basically. You know how they just transfer the MK Ultra programs to Canada after the apparent closing of the project in 1973, which everyone knows isn't true. They just renamed it and continued doing it. But somehow the remote viewing aspect got involved, which I think that both of these programs are connected in a lot of ways. But we'll get into that a little bit later. And it's not every day that you get to talk to someone that was involved in the DIA StarGate project. But since it's your first time on the show, take us back to before 1986, before you got involved with the DIA StarGate project. What was life like? How did these remote viewing abilities develop for you? And when did it start?
I can remember being very young as a child. I used to have a lot of out-of-body experiences before I was 6 years old. So I knew I was going out of body. I would talk to my mother about it. I also had a lot of dreams that were precognitive or premonitions, which I also talked to my mother about, and she would listen. Now, but then once you enter school, it's, you're involved in learning, doing logical things. So I think I always had the ability to either be psychic or aware, but it would come and go in my life. And I always had the interest in it. I remembered when I graduated from college, I was unemployed and I was taking a night class in ESP. We had at the university where I attended, that we had a chemistry professor who taught night classes in ESP. His name was Dr. Carl Bordas. And I can remember taking the night class. And at the time, I was living in Pennsylvania. That's where I was born and raised. And I had put an application in to work for the FBI in Washington, D.C. So while I was taking the night class, I got a call. I was able to get a job at a factory, and I was on the night shift. So I had to quit Dr. Bordas's class, the ESP class, because I went to work so I could make money so I could move to the DC area. Now, once I came to the DC area back in, I would say 79, 78, 79, and 80, a lot of abilities started to come back. And I think because I was not in a stressful, I wasn't living stressfully. So I think the abilities were just always there. Now, when I worked for the FBI, I really wanted to be an agent, but I didn't have the eyesight and they weren't paying much money. And I was working with a woman named Sue, and Sue, her last name was Sue Wilmer. She left the FBI to go work with her husband at Army Intelligence. That he was in the military and they just came back from Japan. So she came to the FBI, but she quit because she was making more money as a secretary if she went to Army Intelligence. Well, about 6 months after she left, she gave me a call and she told me I should apply for an internship that Army Intelligence was offering people with political science degrees. If you go to the Pentagon, they say there's more people sitting around in the Air Force with political science degrees than anything else. So I applied for an internship with Army Intelligence and I received it. And I had clearances. I had clearances. So it was, I think they hired me because I had already had clearances, which means they could bring me on rather quickly. So I went to Army Intelligence and I worked, and I was on an intern program for 3 years. And what I did was I got acclimated to the intelligence world. You know, certain agencies belong to the intelligence community, the FBI, Army Intelligence, CIA, DIA, Air Force Intelligence, Navy Intelligence, NSA. And then you look at their missions, you look at the different methodologies on how people collect information. And then once the information is collected, what's done with it? You have analysts, working different accounts. And then you have to produce papers or intelligence reports for policymakers, like the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon or Congress or the President or the State Department. So that's what I did for about 3 years. Now, my mother called me up one time, and it was around the August or September timeframe. And my mother had always had an interest in the ESP world. She would always she believed in reincarnation, and she would buy books on Edgar Cayce. So as a child growing up, I had the paraphernalia sitting around the house. So my mother called me and she said, her and her friends were looking to do something that winter. My mother always took a class, or she took an art class. And I said, you should take Dr. Bordas's ESP class. And she said, I think I will. So she started to take his class. And what we found out was my mother had the abilities. She had ESP abilities. So as I was working for Army Intelligence, after my internship, I received a job and I was working Central American political, social, and economic affairs and military affairs. And that was in the time of the 80s, whenever we were looking at Noriega, the drug trafficking, Sandinistas, the communist regime in Nicaragua, insurgencies in El Salvador and Honduras. It was a very it was just an exciting time to be working that area. That was a lot of stimulation. There was always a lot going on. Well, in the military, they always rotate people. So I was working at the Army Intelligence Command at Arlington Hall Station. So the general that was in charge left. So they brought in a new general, and his name was General Bert Stubblebine. Now, General Stubblebine was the general that he looked for people who had these abilities. And he used to teach at the Army training school in Arizona. But he was the general that bent spoons. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Men Who Stare at Goats. They had a general in there that it was him. So he was always on the lookout for these abilities. Well, shortly after my mother started to take the class, my father died. And we were having a difficult time. I was having a difficult time with my father's death. So my mother sent me a book, and it was a Ruth Montgomery book. It was called A World Beyond. And my mother said, she sent me the book through the mail, and she said, read the book. You'll feel better after you read it. It will help you understand death. So I read Ruth Montgomery's book. I really resonated with it. And soon after I read the book, I had tried channeling or automatic writing, which I began doing. So then I went to the Mansbridge Institute, I lived in Arlington, Virginia, and there was a man by the name of Fred Mansbridge who was very psychic. He had commercial success. I started to go to his institute to start learning about, I guess, how to be psychic. Well, then I learned that this general that was the head of the command, he was looking for people who had this ability because he was the head of this remote viewing unit up at Fort Meade, Maryland, which was about an hour away from where I worked at Arlington, Virginia. So I met with him and I said I had the abilities, and he looked for people with the abilities. He just wanted to know who they were. Now, what had happened was, General Stubblebine was receiving support for his remote viewers from the Joint Chief of Staff because they were above him. They were a layer above him. Well, the Joint Chief of Staff for Intelligence, he got sent away. He got orders to go someplace else and work. So they brought in a new general who was at the Joint Chief of Staff for Intelligence. And this man was not supporting General Stubblebine in what he wanted to do in remote viewing or in the parapsychology world. So it was 1984, and General Stubblebine decided to retire because he could go out as a civilian and he could do his work in the paranormal. So he retired in 1984. Now, at that point, I'm still working for Army Intelligence. And I figured that from what I understand, I figured the program was probably going away. From what I understand, how was at that time, the remote viewers that were sitting up at Fort Meade, a lot of them were military, not so many civilians. They were waiting for orders to go someplace else to work, or civilians were waiting to get, I guess, placed back into the system to work because they thought this program was going to go bye-bye. Well, what happened was there was a man that worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency named Dr. Jack Verona. And Jack Verona had a doctorate's degree in chemistry. He was always interested he was sending money to Stanford Research Institute to do the investigation of the mind in parapsychology. Now, Dr. Verona used to work for the CIA, then he got transferred to DIA, but he was high up. I mean, he was high up in the echelons in the government system. And there was a man by the name of Dale Graff who worked in Ohio at the Foreign Technology Division. And Dale was a scientist, and he would get, they were called intelligence reports. And he was getting reports back in the 60s or 70s that the Russians are doing this. The Soviet Union is doing this. And Dale And of course, certain people in the intelligence community who was interested in this would talk. So Dale would send the reports to Dr. Verona, and then they would talk. Now, Dale, I believe, had a small remote viewing group in Ohio. Now, Dale received an award where he worked for the Foreign Technology Division in Ohio, and as an award, they gave him a sabbatical, which they were going to give him a year's leave, and he could do whatever he wanted to do with it. So he wanted to go to SRI, he wanted to go to Princeton, he wanted to go to Duke University, and he wanted to go into parapsychology labs to find out what people, what are they what are people finding out about the mind, about people that do this. He was very interested in ESP. Well, when Dale's superior found out that that's what he was going to do for the year, he ripped up the award. He didn't want Dale to do that. So I guess Dale must have talked to Dr. Verona, and Dr. Verona said, well, then don't stay there. Come on up to DC. And so Dale started working for Dr. Verona. So you had these two individuals. They were scientific. They had a scientific background. They weren't more or less running the remote viewers in an operational setting. That was being done by General Stubblebine. But when Stubblebine retired in 1984, Dr. Verona and Dale went to Congress and they said, do not close the program down, just transfer it from Army Intelligence to Defense Intelligence Agency. So that took place in 1985. It probably took about a whole year for the program to be transferred, to keep people in place, to write the congressional language. And then in 1986, I was approached in the January time period to join the unit. So I believe that General Stubblebine probably gave the unit my name to bring me on. So the program was saved. So now the whole program fell under the Defense Intelligence Agency. So they were doing scientific research, they were doing foreign assessment, finding out what the other countries were doing, and they were in charge of the remote viewers to train them and to work them in an operational setting. And that's how I got there. And that's about it.
So whenever you got approached to go into this StarGate program, you knew exactly what you were signing up for. There wasn't any kind of where they were secret about it, right? They were like, this is what we're doing. Are you willing to join?
No, they kind of approached me and they did a psychology test. Well, first of all, the general the general gave my name to hire me. Now, this program, it was called a Special Access Program. They called it a SAP, meaning you can't go out on the street and advertise the job. You need certain clearances. If it was a Special Access Program, the clearances were high, very high level. You couldn't advertise about this job, and you couldn't tell the world that you were using remote viewers to gather intelligence for intelligence operations. So what the military was doing is they would feel if they knew somebody that may have the abilities, they would bring them in and give them a psychological profile test, is what they called it, which was nothing more than the Myers-Briggs psychology test. So when they approached me, they said, oh, here, take this test and we'll see whether or not we can take you. And then, of course, they said, okay, well, now you can come in and join the unit. So yeah, I knew what I was going into. There wasn't anything funny. I mean, I had the clearances. They weren't hiding anything from me. But when I went in, the secretary was like, well, how did you get here? Because they had names on the list of people that they wanted to approach to bring into the unit. But since a general said bring her in, they listened to the general. Now, in the program, there were only two people that were brought in by General Stubblebine, and that was Lynn Buchanan and myself. The rest were brought in by people in the unit, knowing people. And I don't know if that was the best way to do it. And I don't know how good the Myers-Briggs psychology tests were, because the scientists at SRI were using a whole other means to test people on trying to determine whether or not they had the ability. And they were more or less just putting the picture in the envelope and saying access and describe the picture. Also, Stanford Research Institute, being out in the Bay Area, they would travel up to San Francisco and test all the leftover hippies from the 1960s to see if they had. I think they were doing it better than we were, because we ended up bringing in friends. I mean, one guy, he became really good friends with his neighbor, and he's like, I think you should come in and belong to this program. And then we had one guy who was a Mormon, and then every time he would go to the Mormon church in Annapolis, and if there were new Army people coming in and they were Mormons and he became friends with them, he'd bring them into the program. So I don't think it was the best way to bring people in. I think there were better ways to do it. And that's just one of the problems that the unit had, because it was a small unit. But yes, why did you ask? Yes, I knew why did you think that something was not being told to me?
I was just curious if being involved in this this project Stargate, like, you would know that you were involved in it, right? There wouldn't be any doubt in your mind, like, hey,
Oh,
I
absolutely.
could have been involved in this, I might not have been involved in this, you know what I mean? Like, in other words, it was a straightforward program, right? Like,
Oh,
they
it was
told
a
you
straight.
exactly what the mission was, and investigating potential psychic phenomenon such as remote viewing for military
Yeah.
aspect for domestic and international intelligence operations and applications, right?
Well, you have to understand, this was a congressionally mandated program. It was in writing, black and white. It was threefold. We looked at, we had the science. Congress put in a lot of money to get into what is Stanford Research doing, what is Princeton doing. They put in a lot of money to these institutes for research and development. We were looking at foreign assessment. What is the Soviet Union doing? What are the other countries in the world doing? We had a building where remote viewers would show up to work, and we received salaries. So it was a formal program. It was a formal program that existed. A lot of people say, oh, I bet they're still using psychics. They may be. When they closed the program down in 1995, and I had to go to DIA headquarters to work as an analyst, a lot of people knew what I did, and they would approach me. And they would say, oh yeah, I remote view, and sometimes sometimes I'm in touch with General Stubblebine, and I tell him what information I receive. Or a lot of people will come up and say, well, I remote view, and this is what I get giving me information. And that's fine. People think that's fine if people want to do that, but that's not the program I came from. I mean, yeah, anybody can remote view, pass information along. But I know when I was involved with it, this was it was formalized by Congress, congressionally mandated. Al Gore wrote, former President Al Gore wrote the language for it.
So, from my understanding, you mentioned just a little bit ago that it was a very small unit. And from what I've looked up and researched, that there was maybe 15 to 20 people involved in the project at a time. How many people were involved when you were there? Was this 15 to 20 people in its entirety from the time you started in 1978 to when it closed shop in 1996, or was this an overall
I don't
15 to
know how
20
many
people?
I don't know how many people were involved total, because this was going on since 1976. The remote viewers at Fort Meade became operational in 1976. It was a totally different program from CIA, and we're going to get into that. But at the time that I worked for it, from 1980 86 to 95, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I would say 12 to 15 people at a time. I mean, there was no way 20 people, were there 20 people sitting in that in that office with me. It was more like a dozen.
That's really interesting. And you said that a lot of these people were military personnel, not so many civilians, because from my
They
understanding
were,
too, some of,
they were
military were mostly involved because I heard that Ego Swan was actually trying to train these military personnel on how to remote view, which I find very interesting.
Ingo Swann was working as a psychic at Stanford Research Institute. Stanford Research Institute had their own psychics. They had Uri Geller for a while until he was called back to go back to Israel. They had Hella Hammond from Germany. They had Pat Price. They had Ingo Swann. Now, what happened was back in the early years when the program became operational and they started to send and the government started to send a lot of money to Stanford Research to figure out what's going on, they had to go to Congress to get money. Well, every time they would go to Congress to try to get money, they had supporters which would give them the money, but they had people who didn't believe in the program. They had people who didn't want to give them money. And then they were laughed at because they were talking about psychics. And so DIA went to Stanford Research and said, write us up something, because every time we go talk about this, we're being laughed at. Can you give us something that we can sell? We need to sell this. We need to get money, and we're tired of being laughed at. So SRI had Ingo on staff, and they said, Ingo, write up something to help, so we can all get this, keep it moving. So Ingo wrote up something called coordinate remote viewing. And so instead of using New Age language, he used different terms. Like he'll say the remote viewer is nothing more than a psychic. So the remote viewer or psychic will access the signal line. Well, signal line could mean an angel. Who knows what the signal line is? So they wrote it up technically, and there was the coordinate remote viewing manual. Well, so when our government officials would go out, they had some, oh yeah, well, this is how we think it works. And it
fancied it up a little bit.
Yeah, it took away from the New Age part of it, which made people a little bit more comfortable. And that's what all of that was. But the military people, especially Army military, they love training. They just love to train. So when they saw this manual, Army people saw this manual, and then Ingo Swann put everything in steps and how you can train in steps. They just latched on to this, and it was like their he became their god. This is it. This is how you do it. This is, here I'm coming from a background where I'm channeling through entities. I'm giving psychic readings. I walk into the unit, I'm psychic, and they told me you have a bad habit, and that I was there to strictly only do remote viewing, and so I wasn't allowed. So, and that was that. And do you know how the term remote viewing came about?
If you say it, I'll probably remember it, but not right off the top of my head.
Well, back in the early 1970s, there were Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff they were the two remote viewers that coined they were the two scientists that coined the term remote viewing. How they came up with that term was they were studying Chinese children who had precognition, premonition, and whenever they would translate the language from Chinese to English, the children were saying, I remotely view, or I view remotely. And that's how they came up with the term.
Yeah, I knew that Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff had a hand in coining the remote viewing term.
Yeah, and that's how but I always tell people, when somebody does a psychic feat, whether they're using tarot cards, runes, channelings, coordinate remote viewing, extended remote viewing, it's all mental. The information's in the ethers. You're receiving it mentally. the coordinate remote viewing, the writing on the paper, the drawing, the sketching, the crystal ball, the ruins, the tarot cards, that's just the manifestation of the information. The brain, when you talk to scientists who study the brain's doing the same thing. Doesn't matter what you call it. Your brain is doing the same thing as my brain if you're performing a psychic feat. But people get all wrapped around terminology because they have to somehow, they feel like they have to explain it. They feel like this is the way it works. So they just get all wrapped around all of that because we're human, I guess.
Yeah, we want to compartmentalize things and put labels on things so that we can recognize it. I feel like it's a human trait, and we tend to do it with everything that we have a hand in creating or making. So was this project really taking place? Because you mentioned that it was in kind of like an office where you guys would meet and like gather, but the official statement of it says that it was in an old leaky wooden
Oh
barracks,
yeah,
right?
it was
Or-
it was a it was a pre-World War One, not World War Two. It was a pre-World War One building. I mean, a lot of people smoked at the time. It's a wonder that building didn't go up in fire. I don't know why it didn't go up in fire. It should have gone up in fire because we'd sit out on the deck and smoke cigarette. I mean, those, would throw matches under the building. God, no, God, that higher force must have been with us. But yeah, there were two buildings. And there was one that everybody would sit and had desks. And then there was a building like, maybe 30 feet away, and that was the remote viewing building. And we would go into remote view. But yeah, oh yeah. The buildings don't even stand anymore. They just just threw them away. I think somebody came over and just blew on them, and they just went, they just crashed.
Do you think that that was a way for them to kind of maybe discredit the project in a way and be like, hey, yeah, we created it because they declassified the files of the Stargate project, and a lot of those files, Russell Tark had a hand in getting those all declassified. But was that a way to be like, okay, yeah, this was a real thing, but it was unsuccessful. The project, ran out of an old shed in the back of the base. Nothing to see here. Move along.
No, what happened is Dr. Verona retired, Del Graff retired. We had a guy come in from DIA, Mr. John Burbrick. He was in charge of the program, and he sent us a new manager by the name of Al Gerard. And Al Gerard said, there's no way in hell we are working in these buildings. He said, this is disgusting. So he went to Fort Meade. He was at Fort Meade, and he looked for us to have a new buildings, a new office. So he put us in newly constructed. We moved from these old buildings to a rather new building at DIA. And that was all because of I worked for Army Intelligence at Arlington Hall Station. If you rode by Arlington Hall Station, it used to be an old girls' school back way in the 30s. The buildings weren't that great. Now, intelligence has a way of I know you can come to DC and you see an FBI building that says FBI on it, and you see this Langley, CIA, big structures. But a lot of time, and we have the Pentagon. But a lot of times, a lot of these intelligence organizations, no matter what they are, will work in these rather remote, well, not so much remote, but in buildings and structures where you don't think much is going on. And that could be. So if that's why the program was put there for that reason, then it was in line with intelligence thinking. I mean, because I remembered working at Arlington Hall Station. I brought my cousin in who was visiting one time, and I said, this is where I work. I was so proud of it. And she was like, ew, you work here? So it's in line with, it's just in line, I guess, with the intelligent thinking.
But that makes sense. I just was kind of curious if it was some kind of non-linear warfare type of thing that they were doing to, try and discredit the program, because they say that the reason, the official narrative, you have the official narrative and then you have the real thing that actually happened, that there wasn't anything successful that happened out of the Stargate program, and that's the
Yeah, I mean,
reason why they shut it down. Is there any discrepancies between what you experienced being in the Stargate program and the declassified documents?
yeah, I'll tell you. I'll get into that in a minute. They had enough. They didn't need to say that this building was enough to discredit the viewers. They had enough information to discredit us, so they didn't need the crappy building. What happened was, when Dr. Verona retired from DIA, we were placed under John Burbick, and we had also had a retired Air Force general who was the head of the Air Force Medical Intelligence Command. He retired, but this guy knew how to put a lot of money in to get money. He retired, and he knew how to put enough money in the government budget to take money out for remote viewing research for the next 10 years after he retired. That's know-how. He was a genetic doctor, and he was retiring, and he studied genetics. He wanted to know who had, who people that are psychic, it usually runs in the family. We had Dr. Verona, who was a strong supporter, who could get money from Congress. Well, when these people retired, they brought in John Burbick, and John Burbick really did not want the program. He just did not want it. Now, we survived because of Congress. We had members of Congress and their staffs who kept us in place. So what happened was, Congress was getting so angry. They weren't happy at the way we were being treated so they said, let's move the program out of Defense Intelligence and put it into CIA. Now, at the time, George Tenet was the head of the CIA. Now, the CIA gets blamed for everything. Out of all the intelligence organizations that go on, and when there's something awful that goes on, it's always blamed by the CIA. Now, the CIA, we think this is what happened. They got a bad rap from what they were doing back in the early years. What was the name of that program? What was it called?
MK Ultra.
MK Ultra. Yeah, they were doing their thing. They were giving people LSD and not knowing it, and people. Okay, so Congress had to stop that. But Congress was like, stop and dismiss. You're not going to do that. You can't do that. So I think when the CIA got word like, oh, guess what, you're getting this program, there was no way they were going to take it. So what they did, they said, well, we're going to have a review. Let's do a 6-month review of the program, and let's see whether or not this program has done any good. Now, which was stupid, because CIA was one of the customers in the intelligence community. When we worked operations, CIA was one of the agencies we worked for and gave information to. So they hired an outside organization, and I forget the name of it. All I know, it had a lot of A's in the name. So these people came in, and they were supposed to do a 6-month study of remote viewing. Does it work? Does it not work? Did it help? Did it not help? Well, they did not give these people the clearances that they needed to go in and look at the operational. They were not given clearances. So and CIA said that there was no way. They wanted us out of Fort Meade. Apparently we were supposed to go to CIA and work if they took the program, or they'd give us another home. So we packed up all of our boxes, all of our safes, and CIA came up and they took the boxes out. They're talking about this special review, 6-month study. Well, the people who did the study were never given the clearances to go in to get access to the operations that were done. So how could they do a review? How could they tell us whether or not it worked or didn't work in an operational setting when they didn't have access to the information? So that's telling you something was up.
Yeah,
They got
absolutely.
it.
Sounds like a setup.
Okay, so in 19, so now they tell us, well, we're doing a 6-month study. Just go back to, just go back to headquarters at DIA in DC and be an analyst. So we were there working as an analyst, and then they came out and said, I think it was September, October. Oh, by the way, we don't want this program. It doesn't work. It didn't prove anything. So I got a call from a policymaker from Department of Defense at the Pentagon, high-level policymaker. He received my name and number, I think from Dr. Ed May, and he called my boss, and he said, I'd like to take Angela with me for the afternoon. He said, I'm going down to Langley. I'm going down to CIA. He said, I want to look through those boxes. I want to look through. He said, I can't believe that CIA said that there's no validity here. And his job as a policymaker, he was the policymaker who looked at special access programs. He was the head of all special access programs. And his feeling was there had to have been something good in there because it existed. And he couldn't believe, he was like, why would they take this program away? So he said, come with me to CIA. He said, I want to go through those files and I said, well, they're boxes. It was just boxes and boxes. He says, well, come with me. He said, you can go through the stuff quicker than I am. You're going to know what's good and what isn't good. So we went over to CIA. They brought us into a big room and they said, here's your files. The files were never opened. The boxes were never opened. From the time when they left Fort Meade, Maryland in, I think, April, May, or June of 1995, when they wanted to do the 6-month study, those boxes were packed up and brought to CIA so they could do their study. The boxes were never opened. So they knew at that time, CIA knew they weren't going to take the program.
Mm.
It was
So it was shut down whenever it was getting ready to be handed into the CIA's hands. So it started out as an Army program, went to a DIA program, and then it was getting ready to be transferred to a CIA program.
The remote viewing, yeah, the remote,
Yes.
the remote viewers were first Army. DIA was taking care of the research and foreign assessment. Then we had it all under one roof. And then CIA just cut down everything, the foreign assessment, the research, and the remote viewers. They closed down everything. Now CIA declassified that program, but I don't think it was up to them. I think Congress mandated that it be declassified. And I don't know why. I think there was a staffer who just wanted it declassified because he thought that the viewers, I think what he really wanted the viewers to do if it went to CIA was not only work for intelligence organizations, but to also work for maybe police agencies too. And with the higher classification, we couldn't bring people in. You could only bring in certain people that maybe, that were looking at the Soviet Union in the old days in this building and what are they doing. If they lowered the classification of the program, you could bring in police agencies, you could bring in customs, you could bring people in of a lower classification and work for them because they needed help too. And I think that was the reason why they either lowered it or declassified the program. Because the psychics that worked out at Stanford Research, I think they were given low-level clearances, and you just don't talk about it's like a police agency. If you're doing a case, you just don't talk about it.
You think maybe that you commented on this a little bit earlier, that they may or may not still be using psychics? I don't think we really know. But do you think that there's a possibility that the CIA intentionally got rid of the StarGate project so that they could create their own psychic or remote viewing project, because it's really interesting. I remember Russell Targ talking about he was approached by Sidney Gottlieb, and Sidney was the head of the MK Ultra projects. Like we were talking about, using hallucinogenics and LSD drugs to mind fracture and depattern people and psychically drive, people in these programs. And uh, like, I don't really know what's going on there, but I'm sure that from what Russell is talking about, that he wanted to use LSD in this kind of StarGate project on these remote viewers to try and create some form of a remote psychic assassin or something like that.
Okay, but was this for the inside or outside the government? Because the government when he approached Russell Targ, was he a government employee, or was he outside the government?
I think he was working. I think he was working for the government at that time. I could be wrong though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. When I came to work for the FBI in 1978 or 79, there were very strict rules. I mean, I think during Vietnam, the FBI used to record US citizens. Do you remember that? I don't know. How old are you? You look so young.
I'm only 29.
Okay, so you don't remember this. But back in Vietnam, the U.S. and the U.S. felt, oh yeah, if somebody's a communist or they're going to just bug them, or they're going to listen to their conversations. Well, after Vietnam, that stopped. The FBI was told you can't do that. Now,
but then it started right back up again after 9/11 and the Patriot
after
Act.
9/11, but they're doing it in a different way. That they're doing it differently than what they did back then. And I still don't think they should be doing it under 9/11. The only reason they're doing it is because we don't know how to fight an insurgency. We only know how to fight a conventional war. I think that they did that out of fear. They're hoping to make Americans feel better, but they're doing it in a whole different capacity than they did it during Vietnam, but I still don't think it should be done. Now, what happened with CIA is when they were doing their mind control or whatever, the MK Ultra, what was it called?
MK Ultra.
MK Ultra. People died. I mean, what did they have? Somebody, how many people died? One or two?
Very few people actually survived the entire process. Yeah, lots of people died.
Okay, so CIA came in and told the CIA, stop and desist, you're done. Now, 1976 is rolling around, and we're doing the research in SRI. The government is giving Dr. Veronis, it's CIA at the time, he's giving some small money to Stanford Research to do some research, and then there was a downed airplane, and they allowed they picked out some people who they thought could be remote viewers, and they found the airplane. So all of a sudden, the Army intelligence, DIA, the intelligence community wanted to get together and have the band, like a small group of remote viewers. When they went to Congress said they did not want any repeats of the past. So it was mandated by Congress that you can have these remote viewers, but the only thing they will do is remote view. You can't screw with you can't give them anything that's going to alter their mind. You can't talk about, you're not going to talk about aliens. You're not going to study aliens, and they don't want any reports on aliens. All the remote viewers were allowed to do was remote view. They had at the Pentagon general counsel, a group of lawyers that had to review anything and everything. Like if the scientist wanted to study our brain and maybe took us someplace, everything had to pass through that joint lawyers. Now, as a remote viewer, when you do the extended remote viewing, you kind of put yourself in a self-hypnotic state. You kind of go down and you have to visualize. I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Silver Mind Control, but when they try to access information, they kind of close their eyes and relax. Well, sometimes you would have a monitor in the room with you, and sometimes they would kind of help put you into that relaxed state. So in a way, you could say they were kind of putting us in a hypnotic state. Well, that was not allowed. We had to say, oh no, we're putting ourselves in a self-hypnotic state. It had to show there was being no outside influence over my brain. Now, if I was at work and they wanted me to do a remote viewing session and I said, I don't feel like doing it, they could not force me to do it. If I said, well, I don't feel like working today, they could not force me. That was all by, I mean, we were highly, I mean, we went through a lot to exist. Now I can remember, I think somebody I was told before I got there, but I think Lynn Buchanan brought in one of those machines where you kind of go in a machine and your head's sticking out and then you kind of get steamed up or whatever, a deprivation tank.
Yeah.
They had a deprivation tank brought in and they put it into the remote viewing building and they were told to get rid of it because it altered the mind. So, you know, it was very strict with us because of what happened at CIA.
Were you ever in the deprivation tank?
No, that happened before my time. I think it was there for about a day. Somebody, I think Lynn Buchanan brought it in and they were like, "What? When I get it out of here, you know, they're going to shut us down if they find out about it." So it was very strict for us. Now, you know, it was just very, I don't know what's going on now. I don't know what's going on, but I just feel not much. I just feel, I know people in Congress, I talk, you know, I know people that work the intelligence side of things. And if something's going on, I just don't think it's much. And I don't think people are getting paid for it. Now, if somebody like that went to Russell Targ and said they wanted to do something like that, you know, how they would get money, what the terms would be, I don't know. But believe me, there would be we were guided by human use laws. They could not mess with us. They could not mess with us. And if I had a bad day and I got tired and I didn't feel like working, I don't feel like they couldn't, they just couldn't. No, I don't feel like working. It was enough.
That's really good to know. So let's talk about some.
There was not abuse. There could not have been. It was not allowed. If anything, we were getting off. There couldn't have been. But a lot of people think the CIA really, they just really messed up. I don't know. And then I think back in 2019 or something, I read a man who was a magician. He could move, bend spoons, bend coins. He said he was used by the CIA to gather information, and he may have been. They may have cloistered him like, CIA does have its, what do they call in that Mission Impossible, the one unit that, people change clothes as they walk down, they change what they look. I don't know. Now you have NSA, National Security Agency. Those people, if you walk through that agency, everybody's behind locked doors and they're inventing something to try to collect information. And who knows what they're doing. But man, those people come up with a lot of stuff too, electro-optics. But I do know that it's not people try to have a handle on it. I'm not saying there's not abuse. I'm not saying that people aren't going to use you, but there are things in place there are laws in place. There's things in place to, what happened at CIA cannot happen again. It can't. That's like it's going against human rights. And I'm not saying that the wrong isn't. It still may be there. I don't know. But I do think that maybe it's just not what it is. I was always very clear-minded. You got to figure out there's dysfunction. There was dysfunction in the unit. You got a bunch of, you got a bunch of psychics trying to work with scientists, hardcore scientists who are trying to explain this. They're in a whole world different than the psychics. They don't get along. And then you're putting it in a military environment. I mean, talk about nobody was getting along with anybody.
Yeah. Sounds almost like a recipe for disaster a little bit.
And it was. Oh,
Yeah,
sure. Sure it
yeah.
was.
So let's talk
So,
about some of your cases that you've solved. Actually, let's get into a few things that you did in the Stargate program. Does anything stick out that was like, oh wow, like I think that I just discovered something, or was there a big while in there, or did the things that you the kind of the cases and the stuff that you solved happen after you were out of the Stargate
oh
program?
no. Oh no. Well, first of all, we were collectors of information. So it would be good to get the information to the analyst or the people who were involved. And sometimes you receive feedback and sometimes you didn't. And that's just the intelligence community, because I know when I worked as an analyst, um, I'd get information in and I would have to kind of dissect it or whatever. I may put a request out there. But yeah, I did the Lovell, Wyoming case for customs. I found that the Charles Jordan in Wyoming, he was the customs guy that went bad. He went rogue. He took the drug money.
Mm,
I said he was in Wyoming, Lovell, Wyoming, and they didn't believe me. They said he would never be in Wyoming, and then they came back to me and asked me to work it again, and I said he was in Wyoming, and he was found in Wyoming.
wow.
Do you remember that one?
I do not remember it, but Wyoming is only like an hour away from where I'm at in
Okay.
Colorado right now. Yeah.
Okay, well, okay. We got a call from Customs. There was a man by the name of Charles Jordan. He was on the 10 Most Wanted list. There was a TV program called the 10 Most Wanted. So Customs came and they said, hey, can you find this guy, Charles Jordan? And police agencies, they hate it when one of their own go bad. So they came to us and they asked, where was Charles Jordan? And I said he was in I said Lovell, Wyoming. I spelled it Lovell. And my boss, and at the time my boss said, well, there's a Lovell, Massachusetts. And I said, no, it's Wyoming. I'm getting a Wyoming feeling. So we went on the map. We had a map of Wyoming, and here it said, he said, well, there's a Lovell. I said, Lowell. I said, there's a Lowell. I was calling it Lowell, Wyoming. And he said, well, there's a Lowell, Massachusetts. And I said, no, it's Wyoming. So he said, well, there's a Lovell, Wyoming. And I said, close enough. That's where he is. Well, when they took the information back to Customs said he would never be there. And all the other viewers had him in Florida, the Caribbean, everything that made sense.
Mm.
So they asked me to work it again. And I said, no, I didn't want to, because I felt he was in Wyoming. Now, my boss, I didn't realize it at the time, but my boss was telling Customs, well, send an FBI agent up to Lovell, Wyoming. It's not a populated area. Pass the picture around and see if anybody has seen him or knows him. Well, we did not know this at the time, but apparently, after I said he was in Lovell, Wyoming, about 2 or 3 weeks later, this man, Charles Jordan, sent a picture of himself to his mother to show that he was okay. It was like a proof of life picture. Well, when the FBI saw the picture, there was a truck in the picture and the license plate was Wyoming. So they remembered I said he was in Wyoming. So they started sending pictures and all this information of Charles Jordan up to Wyoming. Well, they wanted me to work it again, but I didn't work it. And then they asked me the second time to work it. So I did. And I said, well, if, I felt like he was moving. I said he was moving west of Lovell, Wyoming. And I explained it, an Indian burial ground. Well, they went back to Customs and Dr. Verona said, well, we have a person who's really good at locations, and she feels that he's moved west of Level. So the customs agent said, as we are speaking, we are apprehending Charles Jordan 100 miles west of Level, Wyoming. So they caught the guy. Now, we did not think, and the reason they found him was there was a security guard at Yellowstone National Park that saw him and reported him. So we thought that since he was on the 10 most wanted, this Yellowstone guard saw him and reported him. So we never took the credit for it. Now, this was back in 88 or 89. Now, because he was on the 10 most wanted list, this was not a classified case because it was on TV. Well, about a couple of years later, the BBC gets a hold of this case for the Discovery Channel, and they come into our area from England, and they came 2 years in a row, and they're talking about this case. So they decided to do a reenactment of the case. So they brought in the customs guy. So we're talking to the customs. So my boss, Dale Graff's talking to the customs guy, and he says something like, he said the security guard found him or something. And the customs guy said, no, he said, you found him. He said, we didn't think he was in Level, Wyoming, but when the FBI came in and we saw the picture of the license plate, they remembered that I said Wyoming and Level, and they said they were just sending pictures and pictures and pictures of him, of Charles Jordan, and they said we lambasted that area with him, and they said it was because of my information that they found him. So we went 5-6 years never thinking it was because of me, and it was.
Wow, that's really incredible. So whenever you remote view, because from my understanding, there's a couple of different ways that people remote view. Some people see it, some people feel it, some people smell it, they taste it, and then it's more of their interpretation. And some people, it's all of those things. So whenever you remote view, how is it mostly for you? Did you see the precise
No.
location that he was in?
No, because when you do locations, I don't need to look. When somebody wants a location, they want to know where is somebody. They don't want it. Like I can remember, I think Ed May one time was looking for a downed ship. And he asked the remote viewers, there was a downed ship in the Bay Area. And he said, everybody came back. They described the people, the ship. He said, I don't care. He said, I want to know where's the ship. So when I do a location, I go right for the location. I don't need to describe the area. I go right for the location. It's like I have the brain narrows and I just go boom. I just give a name and that's it. Now, after that, if somebody wants a description or more information, I'll go back in and work the case again, but I'll use a different methodology.
Have you worked any missing persons cases?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I worked the hostages in Lebanon. I don't know. I'm sure, we had hostages in Lebanon by the Hezbollah. Do you remember? I did locations of them, health statuses. There was a colonel, a Marine colonel by the name of Higgins that was kidnapped. And I always had him at a location in Lebanon. I kept putting him at this location and we were looking at imagery and there was nothing, wherever I put him, there was nothing but trees. And it was like, there's nothing there. And, but the analyst at the time who was trying to get a hold of Higgins said, well, it's old imagery. Well, what happened was the Hezbollah, sometimes they let one of their hostages go. I believe it was a German hostage. So our analysts from DIA went to Germany to debrief him, to find out, how the other hostages are doing. So he said, when our American analyst went over, he said, where's Higgins? And the guy said, he's right there. And it was the same location that I had. It was the same piece of him. And the analyst said, but there's nothing there. And the guy said, oh no, they built a structure just to put Higgins in. So he was where I said he was. The building wasn't there.
Wow. That almost sounds like that very similar to when I think it was Pat Price that remote viewed that cabin in West Virginia, but he didn't see the cabin. He saw the secret military base that was just right over the hill of the cabin
That
that no
happens.
one knew about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I did a lot of hostages. I can remember doing health statuses. I kept saying this one man, Poe Hill, I said he has a sore throat. And when he came out, he had throat cancer. And then did Terry Anderson. He was an American journalist. I had him in the Bacaw Valley at one point, and the analyst said he would never be in the Bacaw Valley, but he was.
So you're also able to see disease and illness on people
Oh,
then
sure.
too. Wow.
That's a part of it. Yeah. Sure.
Wow.
That's all psychics can do that. That's all part of it.
What about death? Can you see death on someone? I know that's kind of pessimistic or whatever, but I'm just curious, right? Can you see if someone's going to pass away or die soon?
Sometimes, sometimes not. Sometimes the information isn't given to you. I always feel when a person exits this world, it's not, it's that's a personal thing. It's some level. I just don't do that. When I give readings, and I know a lot of psychics just don't give that information. And I know when I worked as a remote viewer, it you're picking up an aura, you're picking up an energy. What do I know if it's on this plane or not? Or, is
Hmm.
it on this dimension or someplace else? I don't know because I'm not picking up I'm not reading the physical body. The physical body is on Earth. So a lot of times I didn't know whether the person was dead or not. Even when I teach remote viewing, I just tell people access and describe this famous personality. And a lot of times they'll just describe them, and it doesn't matter if they're dead or not because you're not reading the physical body.
Mm. Reading the signature of the body.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. I never thought of remote viewing as well. I mean, we know you've explained that psychics and remote viewing are the same thing. They're just two different labels put on the exact same kind of phenomenon. But I never thought of it like that. You would be able to detect an illness or something like that on someone. That's incredible. It's amazing.
Well, sure. That's what psychics do. That's
Yeah.
what,
Well, thank you.
I like your email raised by giants. Why? How did you get that?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I'm really tall,
Okay.
and my whole family's really tall, and I think that there was some kind of genetic manipulation or some kind of genetic engineering on my dad's side of the family. So I think that quite literally raised by giants, like me and my dad and his brothers are literally the only people that are over 6 foot way back as far as the family goes. So it's kind of strange to me that all of a sudden my grandparents would pop out these 6'5" and 6'7", 6'8" kids. A little strange. I mean,
Wow.
it's possible that something natural happened, but I lived really close to a military base growing up, old
Oh.
Air Force base. So who knows? I think it's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything's possible, and you're right. I mean, who knows? Wait, I think there was a lot going on back then. I mean, I'm not saying it's not going on now, but I think human people are trying to get a better handle on things to make sure maybe things don't happen. But who knows what happens, back, out of DC. I mean, anything can happen. But I like it. I like it. But you look so, I mean, and what made you so interested in the paranormal, I guess?
Well, I cover all kinds of topics on the channel. ETs, UFOs, paranormal, remote viewing, MK Ultra. I just try and kind of like to get to the bottom of everything that I'm talking about, because I think that there's a cover story to everything, I think, and they're trying to make things, seem something when they're really something different. So I really try and dig down deep and get genuine, real people on the show. And I mean, I've had experiences my whole life with paranormal events and being somewhat psychic whenever I was younger, like we were talking about before we came on the show and stuff. So it was always kind of a part of my reality, and just decided to just start talking about it and bringing people on like yourself to have a really in-depth conversation about it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I was able to answer some of your questions.
Absolutely. I really wish that I was kind of more prepared. Honestly, like I feel like you knocked it out of the park. You have a lot of really great information. I would love to have you back on sometime to get
Oh
more in
yeah,
detail.
yeah. I mean, we haven't even started UFOs yet. I mean, I got a whole history of UFOs. I lived in an apartment that there was a man by the name of Adamski. He was an Egyptian UFO explorer, and he showed the very first film of UFOs in the apartment I lived at in Washington D.C.
Adamski, that sounds really familiar.
He was an Egyptian, and that apartment attracted everybody and anybody that dealt with UFO. That apartment was just, and I've had sightings of this. I've had sightings myself.
Yeah, you were talking about earlier how you channeled entities and all that. Yeah, let's bring you back on to talk. We can probably go wherever we want to go with it. We dive deep into all these different topics. I'd love to have you back on. Um,
Yeah.
can you tell people where they can find you online if you'd like to share any of your information, if you have anything that if
Um,
people would like to get a hold of you or
yeah,
contact you?
I, I, yeah, I don't advertise a lot because I do readings and I do a lot. I don't really want to do readings on a full-time basis because I worked for the government for over 32 years. I'm trying to get, I write children's stories that I'm trying to get animated. I've got, in fact, we're working on the very first animation story for children, and it has nothing to do with ESP. They're just stories. I'm working with animators in India and voice people. I may send you my trailer. But I give readings. Readings can really tire me out, and you can't read 8 hours a day. But if people want to get in touch with me or email me at, it's my name backwards, Ford Angela 08 at gmail.com. And I'm going to spell that for you. FORDANGELA 08, no, 04 at gmail.com. It's Ford Angela 04 at gmail.com. But yeah, get in touch with me that way. I teach remote viewing classes. I give readings. But yeah, I got to watch that I don't spend. I try not to spread myself too thin. It's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, if you know, it's a lot.
I bet it takes a lot of energy to do a reading. I'm 100% sure, and you have other things going on. But if you would like to contact Angela, get in the description part of this video. Her email will be in there if you didn't catch it, what she just said. Thanks so much, Angela, for coming on. Appreciate you a lot. For everyone else,
Oh,
thanks for watching and listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel out in the YouTube algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. The link to my channel on Rokfin is in the description. Sign up over there. Hit the follow button for my premium content. And you can catch this episode and any of my other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts. Download them individually to your device for free on Spreaker.com. And remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep loving your heart for everyone, stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time.